The funeral had been 3 days ago, but Diana Chambers could still feel the weight of those eyes on her. White faces, sympathetic in that carefully measured way, turning toward her and then quickly away, as if her grief might be contagious or inappropriate. She had stood at the back of the church, Maya's hand gripped tightly in hers, both of them in black dresses bought from a discount store 2 days prior. David had been her husband once, the father of her child, but the years since their divorce had created a canyon between them that death could not bridge. She had come to pay respects, nothing more. Catherine Whitmore, David's mother, had not acknowledged her presence. Not a glance, not a nod, just that deliberate, practiced blindness that Diana had learned to recognize during her marriage. The kind of invisibility that was louder than any insult. The service had been everything Catherine would have wanted. Flowers in white and cream, arranged with that expensive simplicity that announced its cost precisely by pretending not to. The minister spoke of Catherine's charity work, her dedication to historical preservation, her role as a pillar of the community. He did not mention that her charity had been selective, that her dedication to preservation had extended to bloodlines as well as buildings. David's brother James had delivered the eulogy, his voice steady and practiced, reading words that felt focus grouped for maximum dignity and minimum truth. Diana had watched from her position in the back, feeling Maya's fingers tighten around hers whenever someone's gaze lingered too long on them. Catherine had been crying. Diana had seen, but the tears seemed decorative somehow, like the perfectly placed pearls at her throat. When the service ended and people filed past the casket, Diana had not joined the line. She had already said her goodbyes, though they had been silent and they had been angry. Maya had wanted to leave immediately, but Diana made them stay until the end, until the last white-haired society matron had departed in her town car. It felt important to witness the whole thing, to see Catherine Whitmore put in the ground, to know for certain that this chapter was finally irrevocably closed. Now, as Diana's 15-year-old sedan pulled up the long driveway of the Whitmore estate, that same feeling returned. The house rose before them like a monument to everything Diana had never been allowed to be part of. White columns, perfectly manicured hedges, windows that caught the afternoon sun and threw it back like shields. The gravel crunched under her tires, each sound seeming too loud, too intrusive. The estate sprawled across what must have been 5 acres, maybe more, with gardens that required a full-time staff and a garage that housed 3 cars worth more than every vehicle Diana had ever owned combined. She had been here countless times during her marriage, and every single visit had felt like trespassing. Maya sat in the passenger seat. Her mixed-race features set in that expression of guarded curiosity Diana knew so well. At 17, Maya had learned to read rooms before entering them, to measure her presence against the expectations of others. She had David's straight nose and high forehead, but Diana's full lips and the texture of her hair that no amount of product could fully straighten. In certain lights, in certain company, Maya could pass for Mediterranean maybe, or Latin American. It was a skill she had learned early, that social shape-shifting, and Diana hated that her daughter had needed to learn it at all. "Do we have to go in?" Maya asked, though she was already unbuckling her seatbelt. Her fingers moved with reluctance, as if the simple act of preparing to enter this house required convincing herself afresh. Diana wanted to say no. Wanted to turn the car around and drive back to their small apartment, where the walls didn't judge and the air didn't taste like old money and older grudges. Where they could eat dinner on the couch and Maya could laugh without measuring the volume of her joy. But the lawyer's letter had been specific. Items left to Diana Bennett, née Chambers, by the late Catherine Elizabeth Whitmore. Personal effects to be collected within 30 days of notification. The language had been cold, transactional, exactly like every interaction Diana had ever had with Catherine's legal team. "It won't take long," Diana said, hearing the lie in her own voice. Nothing involving the Whitmores had ever been quick or simple. Even divorce, which should have been straightforward given David's infidelity, which everyone knew about but no one would confirm, had dragged on for 18 months. lawyers making complex what should have been clean, Diana signing papers she barely understood, just desperate to be free. They walked to the front door together, and Diana found herself reaching for the service entrance by instinct before catching herself. 8 years since the divorce, and her body still remembered the unspoken rules, the geography of belonging, Maya noticed. She always noticed. "Front door, Mom. You're allowed." The words stung precisely because they were necessary. Even now, even with Catherine dead and buried, Diana was navigating by the old rules, the invisible architecture of who belonged where. She had spent her entire marriage entering this house through side doors, sitting in kitchens while family meetings happened in living rooms, folding napkins while Catherine's friends discussed art and politics in the next room. David had told her she was being too sensitive, that his mother was from a different generation, that Diana just needed to give it time. Time, as it turned out, had only calcified Catherine's contempt. The door was answered by Martha, Catherine's housekeeper for 30 years. The old woman's face softened when she saw Diana, a genuine warmth that felt like water in a desert. Martha was black too, darker skinned than Diana, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and hands that trembled slightly with age or arthritis or both. She had been kind during Diana's marriage, in the way that people who understand certain struggles can be kind to each other without words. "Diana, baby, come in. You too, Maya." Martha pulled them both into a hug that smelled like lemon polish and the coconut oil she used in her hair. Her embrace was fierce and brief, as if she knew she was crossing some line but didn't care anymore. "I'm glad you came. I wasn't sure you would. Did she—" Diana couldn't finish the question. Did Catherine ask for me before she died? Did she say my name? Did she regret anything? Did she, at the very end, realize what she had done? Martha's expression answered before her words did. Something sad and knowing passed across her features, and Diana felt foolish for having hoped otherwise. She was very specific about what she wanted you to have. "It's all laid out upstairs. I'll take you." The house's interior was exactly as Diana remembered, and that sameness felt like an accusation, as if the 8 years since her divorce had passed here without leaving a mark, while those same years had aged Diana in ways that went deeper than skin. The foyer's marble gleamed under the crystal chandelier. The oriental rug, which Catherine had once mentioned cost more than Diana's annual nursing salary, stretched across imported stone. Ancestral portraits lined the walls, generations of Whitmore faces staring down with that particular expression of people who had never questioned their right to exist exactly as they were. Diana recognized David's great-great-grandfather, a railroad baron whose fortune had been built on land stolen from indigenous people and labor extracted from Chinese immigrants. Catherine had loved telling that story at dinner parties, though she edited out the uglier truths. They climbed the curved staircase, Maya's hand trailing along the mahogany banister. Diana kept her hands to herself, even now. The second floor was quieter, carpeted in thick cream that swallowed sound. Diana remembered Catherine's bedroom being off-limits during her marriage. David's father had died when David was 12, and Catherine had kept the master bedroom as a kind of shrine to her widowhood. No one entered without invitation. The lawyer said there were personal items, Diana said to Martha's back, needing to fill the silence with something other than the echo of her own uncertainty. In Mrs. Whitmore's bedroom, she had them set aside before she passed, maybe 2 weeks before the end. She knew it was coming. Martha paused, her hand on the doorknob. "I don't know what's in that box, Diana, but whatever it is, she wanted you to have it." The bedroom door stood open. Diana paused at the threshold, and for a moment she was 28 again, newly married, standing in this same doorway as Catherine inventoried her with cold blue eyes. "You'll want to use the guest bathroom, dear. This one has my medications laid out. David's told me about your tendency to move things around. We prefer order here." The implication had been clear. Diana was chaos. The Whitmores were order, and chaos must be contained. The room looked frozen in time. The four-poster bed with its cream duvet pulled tight enough to bounce a quarter off. The antique vanity where Catherine had sat every morning, applying her makeup with the precision of someone preparing for battle. The walk-in closet that was larger than the bedroom Diana shared with Maya now, the air still held that ghost of her perfume, something expensive and floral that Diana had never been able to identify. Chanel maybe, or one of those French houses that didn't advertise. On the bed lay a cardboard box, laughably small, the kind you might get at a liquor store. Diana approached it the way one might approach a snake. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, a photo album, its leather cover cracked with age. A set of porcelain teacups, delicate things painted with roses that looked hand-painted. A small jewelry box containing a single strand of fake pearls, the kind that turned your neck green. That was all. Years of marriage, a grandchild, a place in this family that Diana had tried so desperately to earn, and this was what she merited. Thrift store trinkets. Maya picked up the jewelry box, opened it, closed it. Her face was carefully blank, that teenage mask of not caring that Diana recognized as hurt. "Grandmother left you fake pearls. She never considered me real family," Diana said quietly. The truth had a weight to it, spoken aloud in this room that had been the center of Catherine's power, where she had made phone calls that ruined reputations and signed checks that bought influence. This is about what I expected, but she hadn't expected the twist in her chest, the stupid, childish hope that perhaps Catherine had softened in those final days, that perhaps there had been a letter, an apology, some acknowledgement that the way Diana had been treated, the subtle exclusions, the pointed comments about proper English and appropriate hairstyles, the slow erosion of her marriage under the weight of Catherine's disapproval had been wrong. That maybe, at the end, Catherine had seen Diana as human, instead teacups and fake pearls. A final dismissal from beyond the grave. Martha touched Diana's shoulder, and the gentleness of it nearly broke something in Diana. There might be more in the attic. She spent a lot of time up there in her last months, going through old things, sorting. I'd hear her up there at odd hours. Maya was already moving toward the walk-in closet, that teenage fearlessness Diana both envied and feared for. The world had not yet taught Maya to make herself small, and Diana wasn't sure whether to be grateful or terrified. The closet was the size of Diana's current bedroom, with Catherine's clothes still hanging in careful rows organized by color and season. Silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, wool suits in shades of cream and taupe. The woman had owned nothing bright, nothing joyful. Even her clothes had been armor. At the back, partially hidden behind winter coats that probably cost more than Diana's car, was a door Diana had never noticed before. "Mom, look." The door opened onto narrow stairs leading up into darkness. Attic stairs. Diana felt her pulse quicken, though she couldn't have said why. Some instinct, maybe. Some sense that answers lived in darkness. Martha produced a flashlight from somewhere, pressed it into Diana's hand. Her fingers were warm. "I haven't been up there in years. My knees can't take those stairs anymore. But you go ahead." There's a light switch at the top. Should still work. Maya was already climbing, her phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom. Diana followed, each step creaking under her weight, announcing their presence to whatever waited above. The air grew warmer, closer, thick with dust and time and the accumulated breath of decades. At the top, Maya found the switch. A bare bulb flickered to life, illuminating the accumulated debris of multiple generations. Boxes everywhere. Furniture draped in sheets like sleeping ghosts. A dressmaker's mannequin standing in the corner, armless and eternally patient. The peaked roof created strange shadows, and the single window at the far end let in a shaft of dusty sunlight that looked solid enough to touch, thick with floating particles. This was where forgotten things went to die, Diana thought, or to wait. "This is creepy," Maya said, but she was smiling, exploring. This was an adventure to her, Diana realized, not a minefield. Not a place where every step might detonate some old wound. They picked their way through the clutter. Diana saw boxes labeled in Catherine's precise handwriting. David, childhood. James, school years. Christmas decorations, 1985 or 1990. An entire life archived and sorted, everything in its place. Diana wondered if there had ever been a box labeled Diana somewhere, and if so, what Catherine would have chosen to preserve. Probably evidence, probably ammunition, except for one box, shoved into a corner behind a broken rocking chair. No label. Diana pulled it out, her hands coming away gray with dust. The box was heavier than it looked, packed tight. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that crumbled at her touch. More photo albums. Loose photographs spilling out, faces Diana didn't recognize. A young Catherine in the 1960s, her hair in that bouffant style. A man, presumably David's father, in a military uniform. And at the very bottom, something that made Diana's breath catch. A journal. Leather-bound, expensive, the kind with a small brass lock on the front. The leather was dark red, aged to the color of dried blood, and embossed in gold letters on the cover, Catherine E. Whitmore, private. Maya had come to stand beside her, close enough that Diana could feel her daughter's warmth. "Is that her diary?" Diana whispered. Her throat felt tight. The lock was broken or perhaps had never worked properly. Just for show, like so much about Catherine. Diana's fingers trembled as she opened the cover. The first page bore a date in Catherine's elegant script, the kind they taught in private schools. January 1st, 1998. 6 months after Diana and David's wedding, we had the newlyweds over for dinner tonight. Diana is pleasant enough, I suppose. She tries so hard to fit in, poor thing, but she's not one of us, and she never will be. I can see it in the way she holds her fork, the way she laughs too loudly at David's jokes. There's a desperation to her that's quite off-putting. James sees it too, though he's too polite to say so. We'll have to be patient. David will come to his senses eventually. They always do. Diana felt Maya's hand on her arm steadying her. "Mom, you okay?" She wasn't. The words swam on the page, and Diana was back in that dining room 8 years ago, Catherine asking her to pass the salt, and somehow making it sound like an indictment. Diana trying to remember which fork was for which course. David whispering reassurances that felt increasingly like lies. James watching with those cool, appraising eyes, so like his mother's. She remembered laughing at one of David's stories, remembered the silence that followed, remembered Catherine's thin smile. "We should take this," Maya said, and Diana realized her daughter had read over her shoulder. There was anger in Maya's voice, that righteous fury of the young who haven't yet learned that anger changes nothing. Or maybe it was Diana who needed to learn that anger could change everything. "We can't. It's private. It's stealing. She's dead, Mom. And look what she wrote about you. Don't you want to know what else is in there?" What else she said? What else she did? Diana wanted to say no, wanted to put the journal back, close the box, leave this house and never return. Wanted to preserve the careful peace she had built, the life where she didn't ask questions because questions led to answers that hurt. But Maya had already picked up the journal, was already flipping through pages, and Diana found herself leaning in to read, unable to look away. Like watching a car crash, like watching your own execution. The pages were full. Years of Catherine's thoughts, neat and poisonous. Diana saw her own name repeated like an accusation. She saw David's name, Maya's name, written with that particular disdain Catherine had perfected. The word unfortunate appeared more than once. The phrase, correcting the situation, sent ice down Diana's spine. What they found in those pages would change everything. But in that moment, standing in Catherine Whitmore's attic with dust motes dancing in the fading light, and the weight of history pressing down from the peaked roof, Diana Chambers made a choice. For once, she would not look away. For once, she would not be silent. For once, she would not make herself small to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold her. She took the journal from her daughter's hands, closed it carefully and held it against her chest like a weapon or a shield. Both, maybe. Her heart was pounding and her hands were shaking, but her voice when she spoke was steady. "Let's go," she said. "We're taking this with us." The journal sat on Diana's kitchen table like an unexploded bomb. 3 days had passed since they'd taken it from Catherine's attic, and Diana had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that elegant handwriting, those poisonous words arranged so prettily on the page. Maya had wanted to read it immediately, hungry for answers, but Diana had made her wait. Some part of her still believed that opening that journal fully, reading every page, would be crossing a line they couldn't uncross. But the alternative was living with questions. And Diana had lived with questions for 8 years already. The apartment was quiet. Maya had gone to school, though she'd begged to stay home, sensing that something important was about to happen. Diana had kissed her forehead and sent her anyway, needing to do this alone. The morning light came through the kitchen window at an angle, illuminating dust motes that danced like the ones in Catherine's attic. Diana made coffee, though her hands shook enough that she spilled grounds across the counter. She wiped them up carefully, methodically, the way she did everything, the way she'd been taught to be, small, careful, unobtrusive. She opened the journal. The early entries were what she expected. Catherine's observations about Diana's inadequacies, catalogued with the precision of a scientist documenting a failed experiment. The way Diana pronounced certain words, the texture of her hair, the relatives she'd invited to the wedding, people Catherine described as colorful and enthusiastic, in a way that made clear she meant neither as a compliment. David appeared in these entries as someone to be managed, redirected, saved from his own poor judgment. Diana read about dinner parties, where Catherine had seated Diana far from important guests. About Christmas gatherings where gifts for Diana had been deliberately modest, while David's brother James received family heirlooms. About the time Diana had suggested naming their future daughter after her own grandmother, and Catherine had written, "Absolutely not." "The child will have a proper name." Diana's coffee went cold. She kept reading. The entries grew more pointed as Diana's pregnancy progressed. Catherine wrote about her horror at the idea of a mixed-race grandchild, though she never used those words. Instead, concerns about the child's future, worries about complications, suggestions that perhaps Diana and David should reconsider starting a family so soon. Diana remembered those conversations now with new clarity. Catherine pulling David aside at family gatherings. The way David had started asking her if she was sure she was ready for motherhood. The subtle, constant pressure that Diana had interpreted as normal mother-in-law meddling, but was actually something far more calculated. Then came Maya's birth, and the entries took on a different tone. Catherine described holding her granddaughter for the first time, and for a moment Diana thought she might find something warm there, some acknowledgement of love. Instead, "The child is lighter than I expected. With the right guidance, she could pass. We'll have to be careful about schools, social circles. Make sure she understands where she comes from, what side of the family matters." Diana's hands were shaking so badly she had to set the journal down. She walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, staring at herself in the mirror. The same face Catherine had looked at across dinner tables, finding it wanting. The same skin that had marked her as other, always other, no matter what she did or how she tried to belong. She went back to the kitchen, kept reading. The entries from 2005, the year of the divorce, started innocuously enough. Catherine complaining about David working long hours, about James's new girlfriend, about the gardener pruning the roses incorrectly. Then in March, "David came to me today, concerned about his marriage. He says Diana has been distant, distracted. I've noticed it too. She's always been somewhat unstable emotionally. It's unfortunate, but perhaps this is the opening we need." Diana's heart began to pound. She remembered that spring, remembered being exhausted from double shifts at the hospital, trying to keep up with Maya's activities, trying to maintain a house and a marriage that felt increasingly like performance art. David had accused her of pulling away. She'd told him she was just tired. He hadn't believed her. The next entry was dated 2 weeks later. Spoke with David again. Planted the idea that Diana might be seeing someone else. He was resistant at first, but I reminded him of the times she's come home late from work, the phone calls she doesn't explain. He's beginning to wonder. Good, the words blurred. Diana had to read them again to make sure she understood. Catherine hadn't just observed the deterioration of Diana's marriage. She had orchestrated it. The entries continued, methodical in their cruelty. Catherine describing how she'd hired someone to follow Diana, hoping to find evidence of infidelity. When that failed, she'd manufactured it instead. Told David she'd seen Diana having coffee with a man. Suggested it looked intimate. Showed him a photograph, carefully cropped, that made Diana's conversation with a colleague look like something else entirely. David had confronted Diana, and Diana had tried to explain, but Catherine's version had been planted first, had taken root, and Diana's truth had sounded like exactly what a guilty person would say. Diana remembered that fight, remembered David's face, the certainty in his eyes that she was lying, remembered trying to make him understand while he backed away from her, shaking his head. She thought then that their marriage was ending because of her failures, her inadequacy as a wife. She'd carried that guilt for 8 years. She kept reading, and the guilt began to transform into something else, something hot and sharp. The divorce proceedings appeared in the journal like battle plans. Catherine describing conversations with lawyers, strategies for minimizing Diana's claim to marital assets. The Whitmore family money was carefully sheltered, always had been, but there were still things Diana could have fought for. The house they'd bought together, David's pension, custody arrangements that gave her more than every other weekend. Catherine had orchestrated all of it. She'd convinced David to use her personal attorney, someone who'd been serving the family for decades. She'd had Diana's own attorney, a court-appointed lawyer Diana could barely afford, pressured into pushing for a quick settlement. She'd made sure the divorce was finalized before Diana understood what she was signing away, and then came the entry that made Diana stop. Breathing. June 15, 2005. The trust fund is taken care of. James helped, though he doesn't know the full extent. The money David set aside for Maya will be absorbed into the estate after his death. Diana will never know it existed. She signed the papers without reading them carefully. People like her always do. They're so desperate for things to be over, so afraid of conflict, that they'll agree to anything. By the time Maya is old enough to ask questions, the trail will be cold. The money will be where it belongs, with real family. Diana stood up so fast her chair fell backward. She left it there, pacing the small kitchen like a caged animal. Her daughter's inheritance, money David had set aside for Maya's education, for her future, had been stolen. Not just moved, not just delayed, stolen deliberately and systematically by a woman who'd smiled at Maya's birthday parties while planning to rob her blind. Diana picked up her phone with shaking hands. She needed help, needed someone who would believe her, who would know what to do with this information. She scrolled through her contacts and found Lorraine Jackson, a friend from nursing school who'd gone to law school instead, who specialized in family law and estate disputes. Lorraine answered on the third ring. "Diana? Girl, I haven't heard from you in months. I need your help." Diana's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I found something. About my divorce. About my ex-husband's mother, Catherine Whitmore. I saw her obituary. I'm sorry for your loss." The words were automatic, the kind thing to say. Don't be sorry. Just listen. Diana told her everything. About the journal, the manufactured infidelity, the trust fund that had disappeared. Lorraine was quiet while Diana talked, the kind of quiet that meant she was taking notes, her lawyer brain already working through the implications. When Diana finished, Lorraine said, "Bring me that journal, today, and bring any divorce papers you still have." 3 hours later, Diana sat in Lorraine's office, a small space in a building near the courthouse that smelled like old coffee and toner. The journal lay open on Lorraine's desk, and Lorraine was photographing pages with her phone, creating a digital record. Her expression had grown darker with each page she read. "This is worse than I thought," Lorraine said finally. She looked up at Diana, and there was something like anger in her eyes. "Not at Diana, but for her. Your ex-mother-in-law didn't just interfere in your marriage. She committed fraud, multiple counts. Can we prove it? That's the question." Lorraine pulled out a file folder, started spreading papers across her desk. "The journal helps. It's evidence of intent, But we'll need to corroborate what she wrote. Track down the original trust documents. Find the lawyer who helped her. Get testimony from anyone who witnessed what she did. David's brother James. He's mentioned in here. She says he helped. Would he testify? Diana thought about James. Older than David by 3 years. Always more proper, more careful. He'd never been warm to Diana, but he'd never been as overtly cruel as Catherine either. He'd existed in a middle space, polite and distant, like someone determined not to get involved. I don't know, Diana said honestly, but he's the executor of Catherine's estate. Maybe he'd want to know the truth, Lorraine made a note. I'll draft a letter. Request access to estate documents, trust records, anything related to Maya. If he's honest, he'll cooperate. If he's complicit, he'll stonewall, and that tells us something too. Diana felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. It took her a moment to identify it as hope, followed immediately by fear. What if we go through all this and can't prove anything? What if it's just a journal, just one dead woman's words? Then we've lost nothing you didn't already lose 8 years ago. Lorraine reached across the desk, covered Diana's hand with her own. But Diana, I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've seen what wealthy families do to protect their money, their status. What's in this journal? That's not unusual. It's just rarely written down. Catherine Whitmore got arrogant. Thought she'd take her secrets to the grave. She didn't count on you finding them. Diana looked at the journal, at Catherine's elegant handwriting marching across page after page. All those years of pain explained in neat paragraphs. All those years of thinking she'd failed when actually she'd been sabotaged from the start. I want to fight, Diana said. The words felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar. I want Maya to know what's hers. I want them to admit what they did. Then we fight, Lorraine smiled, fierce and bright. But Diana, you need to know this won't be easy. The Whitmores have money and lawyers and social standing. They'll say the journal is fake or exaggerated or the ramblings of a sick old woman. They'll say you stole it. They'll make you defend every choice you've made since the divorce. They'll try to make you small again. Diana thought about Catherine's attic, about dust and darkness and secrets hidden in corners. Thought about Maya, 17 and brilliant and deserving of every advantage that had been stolen from her. Thought about herself at 28, desperate to be loved, willing to diminish herself to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold her. Let them try, she said. That night, Diana told Maya everything. They sat on the couch in their small living room, the journal between them, and Diana walked her daughter through Catherine's campaign of destruction. Maya's face went through a dozen emotions: shock, hurt, anger, disbelief. She cried when Diana read the entries about making sure Maya understood which side of the family mattered. She swore when Diana explained about the trust fund. So grandmother never loved me. Maya's voice was flat, trying for control and not quite achieving it. She loved the idea of controlling you, Diana corrected, of shaping you into what she wanted. That's not the same as love. And Dad? Did he know? That was the question that had been haunting Diana since she'd read the journal. How much had David known? How much had he suspected but chosen not to see? The journal suggested Catherine had manipulated him too, but David had made choices. He'd believed his mother over his wife. He'd walked away from his daughter after the divorce, maintaining minimal contact, as if Maya had been part of the marriage he wanted to forget. I don't know, Diana said honestly, but we're going to find out. The next week moved with the strange momentum of events Diana couldn't control. Lorraine sent letters to James Whitmore requesting documents. She filed preliminary motions with the court, arguing for access to Catherine's estate records. She hired a handwriting analyst to verify that the journal was authentically Catherine's work, and slowly, piece by piece, they began building a case. James's response came 10 days after the initial letter. Diana opened it in Lorraine's office, her hands steadier now than they'd been 2 weeks ago. The letter was brief, formal, typed on expensive letterhead. Mr. Whitmore acknowledges receipt of your inquiry and requests a meeting to discuss the matters raised. He suggests next Tuesday at 2 p.m. at his attorney's office. That's not a no, Lorraine said, reading over Diana's shoulder. That's interesting. You think he'll help us? I think he's curious. Or worried. Maybe both. Tuesday came cold and gray, the kind of November afternoon that promised rain. Diana dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made her feel armored. Dark slacks, a blazer she'd bought for job interviews, low heels that didn't make noise when she walked. She met Lorraine outside the attorney's office, a sleek building downtown that housed the kind of law firm that represented old money. James was already there when they arrived, sitting in a conference room with his own attorney, a silver-haired man who looked like he'd been born wearing a suit. James had aged in the years since Diana had seen him last. There was gray in his hair now, lines around his eyes. He looked tired. Diana. He stood when she entered, a gesture of politeness that seemed automatic. Thank you for coming. I'm not sure I had a choice. Diana sat across from him, Lorraine beside her. The journal sat in her bag, a weight she carried everywhere now. James's attorney cleared his throat. My client has reviewed your letter and the claims made therein. He's prepared to discuss estate matters, but we want to be clear that nothing said in this meeting constitutes an admission of wrongdoing. Noted, Lorraine said coolly. There was a pause, the kind that stretched uncomfortable. Finally, James spoke. Is it true? About the journal? Diana pulled it from her bag, slid it across the table. James picked it up carefully as if it might bite. He opened to a random page, and Diana watched his face as he read. Watched the recognition, the horror, the slow collapse of whatever version of his mother he'd been carrying. I didn't know, he said after a long moment, about most of this. I knew she didn't approve of your marriage. I knew she wanted David to divorce you. But this, he gestured at the journal, helpless. This is systematic. Did you help her hide Maya's trust fund? Diana kept her voice level, though her heart was racing. James closed his eyes. I signed papers, estate reorganizations after my father's death, then updates when David's marriage ended. Mother told me it was standard, protecting family assets during a divorce. I didn't ask questions. I should have, but I didn't. So Maya's money is gone. Diana felt something crack inside her, the hope she'd been building. No. James opened his eyes, looked directly at her for the first time. It's there, absorbed into a larger family trust, exactly like Mother wrote. But it's still there, still designated for Maya, just buried under layers of legal structure that would take years to untangle, unless the executor releases it. You're the executor, Saint, Lorraine said. Yes, so you could fix this. You could give Maya what's hers. James looked at his attorney, who was shaking his head minutely. My client needs to consider the implications for the entire estate. There are other beneficiaries, tax considerations. I don't care about tax considerations, James interrupted. His attorney looked shocked, like a dog whose master had suddenly bitten him. Diana, how much did you know? When you were married to David, when you lived in that house, how much did you see? Diana thought about dinner parties where she'd served food and cleaned up after. About family meetings she'd been excluded from. About the way David had presented financial decisions as already made, not up for discussion. Nothing, she said. I saw nothing. I was kept separate from all of it. Mother made sure of that. James tapped the journal. She was very good at compartmentalizing, at making people see only what she wanted them to see. I thought she was just traditional, just concerned about family reputation. I didn't realize she was actively destroying your life. But you benefit from it. Lorraine's voice was sharp. The estate your mother left, the assets you've inherited, some of that was gained by defrauding Diana and Maya. I know. James looked older than his 48 years, suddenly worn down by revelations. And I don't want it. Not like this. His attorney tried to intervene again, but James held up a hand. I'll release the trust fund, all of it. I'll cooperate with whatever investigation you want to conduct. But I need something from you, Diana tensed. Here it came. The negotiation, the way powerful people always made sure they came out ahead. What? I need to know this ends here. That you won't pursue criminal charges, won't drag this through every newspaper and gossip column. Mother's dead. David's dead. I can't change what they did, but I can try to make it right without destroying the entire family in the process. Lorraine started to object, but Diana spoke first. I don't want revenge. I want Maya to have what's hers. I want acknowledgement that what was done to us was wrong, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Then we have an agreement. James extended his hand across the table. Diana looked at it for a long moment. This man had stood by while his mother destroyed Diana's marriage, had signed papers that stole from a child, had lived comfortably on family money built partly on the back of Diana's pain. But he was also offering a way forward that didn't require years of litigation, that gave Maya her future back without turning their lives into a public spectacle. She took his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, the handshake of someone who'd been taught manners even if he hadn't always been taught ethics. One more thing, Diana said as they stood to leave. The trust fund. How much is it? James named a figure that made Diana's knees weak. Enough for college. Enough for graduate school. Enough for Maya to build a life without the financial terror that had shadowed Diana's entire adult existence. David really left that for her. Diana's voice cracked despite her best efforts. He did. Whatever else he was, he loved his daughter. He just didn't know how to fight our mother. Outside, in the gray afternoon, Lorraine pulled Diana into a fierce hug. You did it. You actually did it. We're not done yet, Diana said, but she was smiling. We still have to get the money transferred, documents signed, everything legal. Details. Lorraine waved a hand. The hard part was getting him to admit the truth. Everything else is just paperwork. Diana thought about Catherine's journal, about elegant handwriting and poisonous words. Thought about all the years she'd spent believing she'd been the problem, the failure, the one who wasn't enough. Thought about Maya growing up thinking her father hadn't cared, that her grandmother's coldness had been her fault somehow. I need to tell her, Diana said. Maya needs to know that she was wanted. That money was set aside for her because her father loved her, even if he was too weak to protect her. That night, Diana and Maya sat together on the couch again, but this time, Diana brought good news. She explained about the meeting with James, about the trust fund, about the money that would be Maya's. Maya cried, but these were different tears than before. Relief mixed with grief for a father she'd barely known, for a grandmother who'd never seen her as anything but a problem to manage. We're going to be okay, Maya said, and it sounded like a question. We're going to be better than okay, Diana answered. We're going to be free. But freedom, Diana was learning, wasn't the same as closure. The journal still sat on her kitchen table, and there were entries she hadn't read yet, pages she'd been avoiding. Late that night, after Maya had gone to bed, Diana opened it again. The final entries, written in the last months of Catherine's life, had a different quality. The handwriting was shakier, the lines uneven. Catherine had been dying when she wrote these pages, and something about approaching death had made her reflective, or maybe just more honest. I've been thinking about Diana lately, about the choices I made. James doesn't understand why I worked so hard to end that marriage. He thinks it was simple prejudice, simple racism, but it was more complicated than that. I was afraid of what Diana represented, of change, of a world where the old rules didn't apply anymore, where people like her could marry people like us, and it would be seen as normal. I was afraid of my granddaughter growing up in between, not fully one thing or another. I thought I was protecting my family, protecting David from making a mistake, protecting Maya from a difficult life, but I see now that I was protecting myself, my version of the world, my certainty that I knew how things should be. Diana will probably never see these words. Even if she does, I doubt they'll matter. An old woman's regrets don't undo the damage she's done. I destroyed her marriage. I took her daughter's inheritance. I made sure she knew every day that she would never be good enough for us. The irony is that she was always too good for us. Too kind, too patient, too willing to forgive. She should have fought back. Should have told me to go to hell. But she just kept trying to fit, kept making herself smaller, and I exploited that. I exploited her decency. If there's an afterlife, I suppose I'll have to answer for that. But since there probably isn't, These words will have to serve as my confession. I was wrong about Diana, about Maya, about what family means. I was cruel when I could have been kind, and destructive when I could have been accepting. And now it's too late to be anything else. Diana closed the journal. She should have felt vindicated reading Catherine's admission of guilt. Should have felt satisfied that even Catherine had recognized her own cruelty. But instead, she just felt tired. All of this, all of the pain and damage and years of self-doubt because one woman had been afraid of change. She thought about calling Maya, sharing this final entry, but decided against it. Some burdens didn't need to be passed on. Maya could know that she'd been robbed, could know that her grandmother had been wrong, could know that justice was being served. She didn't need to know that Catherine had understood all of this and done it anyway. Diana put the journal back in her bag. Tomorrow she would give it to Lorraine. Let it become evidence. Let Catherine's own words condemn her in whatever legal proceedings were still to come. But tonight, she would let it rest. The apartment was quiet. Through the thin walls, Diana could hear Maya's even breathing, the sound of her daughter sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. Outside, rain had finally started, pattering against the windows in a rhythm that sounded almost like comfort. Diana thought about the moment in Catherine's attic when she'd decided to take the journal, to stop being silent. That had been 2 weeks ago, but it felt like another lifetime. She'd been so afraid then, afraid of conflict, afraid of being seen as difficult, afraid of disturbing a peace that had never really existed. She wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, whatever the Whitmore family might still try to do, Diana knew she would face it standing up. Not for herself, though that mattered too, but for Maya, who deserved to grow up knowing that when someone tries to make you small, you have every right to take up space. That family isn't defined by blood and money, but by who shows up, who fights for you, who sees you as fully human. Diana had been invisible in the Whitmore family for years, but she was visible now. She was seen, and she was never going to let anyone make her disappear again. The courthouse steps were the same ones Diana had climbed 8 years ago, when she'd signed away her marriage and unknowingly signed away her daughter's future. Then she'd walked up them with her shoulders hunched, trying to make herself invisible. Today, she climbed them with her head high, Lorraine beside her and Maya slightly behind, the three of them a unit. The morning was cold and bright, the kind of November day where everything looked sharp-edged and clear. Inside the courtroom was smaller than Diana had imagined. Not the grand space of television dramas, but a functional room with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. James Whitmore was already there with his attorney, and when Diana entered, he stood. The gesture felt significant somehow. This man who'd spent years looking through her, finally seeing her enough to rise. The hearing wasn't dramatic. There were no impassioned speeches, no Perry Mason moments of revelation. Instead, Lorraine presented documents in a steady voice, walking the judge through Catherine's journal entries, the trust documents, the pattern of fraud that had stolen Maya's inheritance. James's attorney tried to argue that the journal was merely personal opinion, not evidence of actual wrongdoing, but the financial records told their own story. Money that should have been protected for Maya had been deliberately moved, hidden, made inaccessible. The judge, a black woman in her 60s, who'd probably seen every variation of this particular story, listened with an expression Diana couldn't read. When Lorraine finished, when James's attorney had made his half-hearted objections, the judge looked directly at Diana. "Miss Chambers, I've read your petition and supporting materials. I've also read selections from Mrs. Whitmore's journal. I want to be clear about something. What was done to you and your daughter was not just unethical. It was illegal. Estate fraud, manipulation of divorce proceedings, deliberate concealment of assets from a minor child. If Mrs. Whitmore were alive, I would refer this case for criminal prosecution." Diana felt Maya's hand slip into hers. However, the judge continued, I understand that the executor has agreed to voluntarily restore the trust fund and provide full accounting of all estate assets. Mr. Whitmore, is this correct? James stood again. Yes, Your Honor, I've already begun the paperwork to transfer the full amount, plus accumulated interest, into a trust account for Maya Chambers. I've also commissioned an independent audit of my mother's estate to ensure there are no other hidden assets or obligations. Good. Then I'm ordering the immediate release of all funds that were designated for Maya Chambers in the original trust documents. I'm also ordering that Miss Diana Chambers be provided with complete copies of all estate records, all trust documents, and all correspondence related to her divorce from David Whitmore. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor. The judge looked at Diana again. Miss Chambers, you've been wronged in ways that can't be fully remedied by money, but I hope this helps. Your daughter deserves her inheritance, and you deserve to know the truth about what was done to you. Diana tried to speak, but found her throat tight. She nodded instead, squeezing Maya's hand. Outside the courthouse, James approached them as they stood on the steps. His attorney had disappeared, probably recognizing that whatever came next wasn't about legal strategy anymore. Diana. James's hands were in his pockets, his posture uncertain in a way that made him look younger than his years. I know this doesn't fix anything. I know that giving Maya her money back doesn't undo the years you struggled, doesn't undo the lies my mother told. No, Diana agreed. It doesn't. But I want you to know I'm ashamed of what she did, of the fact that I didn't see it or didn't want to see it. You were part of our family, and we treated you like an intruder. That was wrong. Maya spoke up then, her voice steady despite the emotion Diana could hear underneath. Did you ever like me? When I was little, when I came to visit, did you see me as family or just as a problem? James looked at her for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know. I think I saw you the way my mother taught me to see you, as someone who complicated things, as evidence of my brother's poor judgment. It wasn't until I read her journal, saw how calculated it all was, that I realized I'd been trained to see you as less than, and I'm sorry for that. You deserved better. Yeah, Maya said. I did. They left him there on the courthouse steps, and Diana didn't look back. There would be more meetings, more paperwork, the mechanics of transferring money and closing this chapter officially. But the important part was done. The truth was acknowledged. The theft was being corrected, and Diana had stood in a courtroom and heard a judge say what she'd needed to hear for 8 years. You were wronged. That evening, Diana took Maya back to the Whitmore estate one last time. Martha had called, said there were a few more boxes of Diana's old things that had been found in storage. Diana hadn't wanted to go, but Maya had asked, and Diana was learning to listen when her daughter asked for things. The house looked different now, still imposing, still beautiful in that cold way, but it no longer felt like it had power over Diana. It was just a building, just brick and mortar and other people's history. Martha met them at the door with hugs and tea, and they sat in the kitchen that Diana had once cleaned, drinking from cups Diana had once washed. I'm glad you got justice, Martha said. Mrs. Whitmore, she was good to me in some ways. Paid me well, gave me time off when my mother was sick, but she had a meanness in her too, especially toward people she thought were beneath her. I saw how she treated you, Diana. I'm sorry I never said anything. You needed your job, Diana said. I understand. I still should have said something. Should have testified if you'd needed me to, but I was scared. Isn't that stupid? A woman my age, scared of a family that can't even fire me anymore. It's not stupid, Diana said. Fear makes sense. We all do what we need to do to survive. They collected the boxes, surprisingly heavy with items Diana had forgotten she'd left behind. Old photo albums from the early days of her marriage, when she'd still believed love could conquer Catherine's disapproval. Kitchen items she'd bought with her own money but abandoned in the divorce. A box of Maya's baby clothes that made Diana's throat tight. As they were loading the car, James appeared, walking across the lawn from the garage. He looked uncertain, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to approach them. Diana waited, letting him come to her. I wanted to give you this, he said, holding out an envelope. It's from David, a letter he wrote before he died. I found it in his papers addressed to you. I don't know why he never sent it. Diana took the envelope, her hands steady. Thank you. She waited until they were home, until Maya was in bed before she opened it. David's handwriting was less elegant than his mother's, but still careful, still controlled. The letter was dated 3 months before his death. Diana, I don't expect you to read this, and I'm not even sure I'll send it. But my doctor says I should get my affairs in order. And I realized that means confronting the things I never dealt with when I was healthy. I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you more than that, but an apology is all I have left to give. I believed my mother about you, about the affair that never happened, about you being wrong for our family, about Maya being better off with minimal contact with you. I believed her because it was easier than standing up to her, and because some part of me had been taught, long before I met you, that women like you were temporary. That real family looked a certain way and you didn't fit. I was wrong. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away because I was too weak to fight for it. Maya deserved better than a father who chose his mother over his daughter. You deserved better than a husband who let you be driven away. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see what was taken from you, from Maya, from all of us. And I'm sorry. Diana folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. She should feel something, she thought. Vindication or anger or grief. But mostly she just felt tired. David's apology, like Catherine's journal confession, changed nothing about the years that had already passed. It didn't give Maya back her father or Diana back her trust, or either of them back the time they'd lost. But maybe it was enough to know that even they had seen the truth eventually. Even if it was too late, the money transferred into Maya's account 2 weeks later. Enough to transform their lives. Enough to mean Maya would never have to choose between dreams and practicality the way Diana had. They celebrated quietly, just the two of them. Pizza on the couch and a movie neither of them really watched. What are you going to do with it? Diana asked. Maya was quiet for a moment. College, obviously. Maybe study abroad. Maybe start a business someday. I don't know yet. But Mom, some of it should be yours too, for everything you gave up. It's yours, Diana said firmly. Your father left it for you. It's yours. He left it for me because you raised me alone, because you worked doubles and went without, and never made me feel like we were poor, even though we were. So yeah, it's mine, but you're the one who earned it. Diana pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling Maya's heartbeat against her chest. This girl, this brilliant, stubborn, beautiful girl, was worth everything. Every sacrifice, every struggle, every moment of self-doubt. Maya was the inheritance that mattered. Not money or houses or family names, but this person Diana had raised to stand up when others tried to push her down. 6 months later, Diana stood in the parking lot of a new hospital across town, about to walk in for her first day at a new job. Better hours, better pay, a management position she'd been scared to apply for until Lorraine had literally filled out the application for her. She'd been afraid she wasn't qualified, wasn't ready, wasn't enough. But the interview panel had seen something in her, and she'd gotten the call 2 weeks later. She pulled out her phone and took a photo of the building, sent it to Maya with a message. First day. Wish me luck. Maya's response came immediately. You don't need luck. You're Diana Chambers. You survived Catherine Whitmore. You can survive anything. Diana smiled and put her phone away. She checked her reflection in the car window, adjusted her badge, and walked toward the entrance. Not hurrying, not hesitating, just walking head high, taking up exactly as much space as she needed. Inside, the familiar hospital smell greeted her, antiseptic and floor wax and that underlying scent of illness and healing intertwined. But this time, she wasn't entering as someone desperate for hours, grateful for whatever shift she could get. She was entering as someone who'd fought for herself, who'd stood up to people with more money and more power, and won. The orientation was standard, the paperwork tedious, the tour of the facility informative but boring. Diana shook hands with colleagues, memorized names and faces, learned the layout of her new department. Ordinary things, unremarkable things, the kind of day that happened to people all the time. But for Diana, it felt like everything. This was the life she'd been building towards since that moment in Catherine's attic when she decided to take the journal, to stop being silent. Every conversation with Lorraine, every page of evidence gathered, every moment of standing up when her instinct was to shrink down, had led to this. She thought about Catherine sometimes, usually late at night when sleep was elusive, wondered what the woman would think seeing Diana now, successful and confident and refusing to be made small anymore. Would she feel regret, anger, or just that same dismissive contempt that had colored every interaction? It didn't matter, Diana realized. Catherine's opinion had mattered once, had shaped Diana's entire world. But Catherine was dead, and Diana was alive, and the only opinion that mattered now was her own. That evening, Diana came home to find Maya at the kitchen table, college brochures spread out in front of her. Big schools, small schools, prestigious names and hidden gems, the world laid out in glossy pages and bold promises. "I've been thinking," Maya said, without looking up, "about what grandmother wrote in her journal. About me being mixed, about passing, about which side of the family matters." Diana's chest tightened. This was the conversation she'd been dreading, the one where she'd have to help her daughter process the knowledge that her own grandmother had seen her as a problem to solve. But Maya looked up, and she was smiling. "I was thinking, she spent so much energy trying to define me, trying to make me fit into her boxes. And I'm just done with that. I'm not half of anything. I'm not too much of this or not enough of that. I'm just me, Maya Chambers. And if that makes people uncomfortable, that's their problem, not mine." Diana crossed the room and pulled her daughter into a hug, fierce and tight. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," Maya squeezed back. "You showed me what it looks like to stand up, Mom, even when you're scared, even when it would be easier to stay quiet. You showed me that our voices matter." Later that night, Diana stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, at the ordinary neighborhood where she'd built an extraordinary life. She thought about the girl she'd been at 28, desperate to be accepted, willing to erase herself to earn love. She thought about Catherine's attic, about dust and darkness, and a journal that had changed everything. She thought about courtrooms and lawyers and the slow, grinding work of getting justice. And she thought about David's letter, his too late apology, his admission that she'd been too good for them. He'd been right, but not in the way he'd meant. Diana hadn't been too good in some moral sense, some claim to superiority. She'd been too whole to be diminished, too strong to be permanently broken, too real to be erased. They'd tried to make her invisible. Catherine with her careful cruelties, David with his weakness, James with his willful blindness. They'd tried to make her doubt herself, question her worth, accept that she deserved only their scraps and dismissals. But Diana had found her voice in the last place she'd expected, in the written words of her enemy, in the evidence of her own persecution, in the proof that the problem had never been her at all. She'd survived Catherine Whitmore. More than that, she'd defeated her not through revenge or cruelty, but simply by refusing to disappear, by standing up and saying, "No, this is wrong, and I will not accept it." Diana closed the curtains and went to bed. Tomorrow there would be work and bills and the endless ordinary details of life. But tonight, for the first time in years, Diana slept deeply and dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who'd finally, truly come home to herself.